Hello and welcome. Thank you for all of you joining us here today. My name is Patrick Clora, and I'm the Director of Customer Marketing here at GiftSmart by Community Brands. And we are very excited for a conversation that we're going to get into today, and which is episode 7 in our Fundraising Success Blueprint Series, where our sole hope is to go in depth on 12 areas of fundraising to not only address each topic, but at the end to provide a whole comprehensive blueprint, hence the name, through the series that we have. And we are huge believers that people don't want to hear from us. They want to hear from their peers within the development space. And today I am thrilled to be joined by 3 amazing women who have graciously given up their time to spread their knowledge. And I am joined by our fellow panelists, Kirsten Promozic, who is the training specialist here at GiftSmart, Pam Engel, who is based out of a little bit outside of Philadelphia with Malvern Preparatory School, and Sam Threadgill with the Humane Society of Northeast Georgia, about 50 miles or so outside of Atlanta. So Kirsten, Pam, Sam, thanks to all of you for joining us here today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to start, in the first of what I probably will chuckle when I say it, Pam and Sam, could each of you kind of just introduce yourselves a little bit and talk about your role within the organization, some of the work that you guys are involved with?
Sure. I'm Pam Engel. I'm the Director of Annual Leadership Giving here at Malvern Preparatory School. We're a private Catholic Augustinian all-boys school, grades 6 to 12. My primary role here is fundraising through appeals and events, and we are proud to be partners with GiftSmart. Absolutely love the platform, and we just recently had a great event where we surpassed our goal. We almost doubled it. I'm excited to share some of the highlights.
And I'm Sam, Samantha Threadgill. I'm the Development and Marketing Director for the Humane Society of Northeast Georgia, which is an animal shelter, a no-kill shelter. And we also recently had our annual art auction. We have used GiftSmart for many years, and we love them very much. So I'm excited to be here as well.
This is great. It's said often, but this is a true A team, and I think a lot of information we're going to get into that will be helpful, folks, whether you're listening live or listen after the fact. And really, before the call, we had the panelists send in a couple of comments and questions, as well as some listeners. So we're going to make sure that we've incorporated that into the presentation. But throughout the call, if you do have questions, please don't hesitate to send them early and often through the chat feature or the question and answer feature that you'll see in there. And, we'll also be putting in some different resources. I know, especially with our topic being data, some of the times can be overwhelming to folks. So we have some resources, both that are kind of specific to GiftSmart in the nonprofit space, as well as just personal tips that we've all seen success with. And so with that, putting everybody in a good position to succeed, the top 3 most common tips and things that we see people enjoy the webinar and make the most out of the experience is, use the gallery mode. If you do have questions, as I mentioned, put them in the question and answer section, and check the chat where we'll be putting some resources. So a lot to cover today, and it's a topic I think all 4 of us could go in depth in for more than just an hour, but we'll limit it to that. So the 3 main topics that we're going to dive into today are what data can do for you. So where does the value lie when you have an abundance of numbers, and how can you interpret it and make actionable intelligence? Hopefully you won't feel intimidated as we go through it, and we'll share some resources to take it away. And then Kirsten is going to go over in depth some information about Google Analytics. And I think, each of the 3 of us who aren't named Kirsten on this call have learned a few tips and tricks just in the past couple of days. So I think that'll be a lot of fun. And then at the end, spending some time on some of the reports that Pam and Sam and their teams leverage the most to really make the most of their experience and kind of overall. So we are going to get started here with a poll that I'll bring up, and just trying to gauge where people are at. So I know 2021 is, the continued evolution of a new fundraising landscape. So for you and your organization, what type of campaigns are you looking at, be it all virtual, all hybrid, some combination thereof? And while folks are weighing in, Kirsten, can you just give us a high level, a little bit background kind of on your role here and some of the stuff that we'll dive into as it pertains to Google Analytics?
Yep, absolutely, Patrick. Thank you. So like you said, my name is Kirsten Promozic, and I have been a part of the GiftSmart team now for going on 7 years. I started my journey here traveling across the country to work at the different fundraising events and managing those on-site teams, and then eventually progressed into the role that I have now on the training and enablement team, where I now have the opportunity to dive deep into our metrics and develop training materials based on the trends that I can see and determine from that. So to get us into the right mindset for today's chat, I just want to start by introducing Google Analytics and have you think about it as a way to paint a picture, not only of your supporters, but also of those that were interested enough in your messaging and your mission that they clicked on that link to go to your campaign site. And once they reached your site, you can now see where they found the link, what device they were on, what time of day it was, and even their general geographic location. Because it's more important than ever to utilize the data that we have available, because the pandemic allowed a lot of organizations to do something that most probably hadn't even considered before, tapping into that virtual and online pool of potential supporters. But now that many are going back into those in-person events, they still want to keep those new online users engaged. So having that ability to pull data that can illustrate which social media platforms drew the most interest, along with some of those other metrics that we're going to discuss here in a little bit, will allow you to refine your upcoming marketing efforts.
That is, we're very excited. I think that's the easiest way. So I will close the poll here and share the results with everybody, which we have up now on the screen. So I think in terms of it, I think this has been the overwhelming theme that we've seen and consistent that kind of as Kirsten alluded to, that especially as each state, has different regulations, that's getting back to some live in-person as well as incorporating some virtual and hybrid elements into it, which is great. And as we get into now our kind of our first topic and what data can do for you, there is a gentleman I've always been enamored with, W. Edward Demings, who was an engineer, statistician, amongst 100 million other things. But one of his two quotes that I'm the biggest fan of is, "Without data, you're just another person with an opinion." And so I think, kind of what we'll talk a little bit about is how do you, numbers are just numbers unless they tell a story and can drive you to make some actionable decisions. So one of the things we want to start with is a real life example. We just asked all of you listening to take a poll. And one of the reasons that we do that is what we have on screen is a poll that we used in our Outside the Room Success Series that we did last summer. Every week from June until September, we use the same question week over week in order to get some information. And our goal was to ensure that we were pulse checking how do people in the fundraising space feel, and why we wanted to do that is be able to, is there a change in the climate? Is there making sure that we can derive the content to meet the needs? So one of the things that data was able to do for us is to inform conversations, such as one we're having today. We were able to get a trend line and see, if you look at this graph here, left to right, that there was a 20% growth throughout the years that went on in terms of organizations who started to feel more and more confident that they were going to be able to hit their fundraising goals for 2020. And I think, logically that kind of makes sense as people finally adapted to the pandemic and things that were happening. But, not only seeing the biggest growth, but seeing a decrease in folks totally overwhelmed or things like that. So as a real life example for us, this is one of the reasons that we have the same poll question each week as we do these things, to be able to analyze what is happening and stuff overall. But again, we're not here just to listen to us talk. So, Pam and Sam, the question I think that I'm curious to have each of you kind of expand on is, within your organizations, what role does data play? Is it something that's integral? Is it something that some people are for, others are totally spinning their heads? Or just kind of elaborate a little bit on the value it plays for each of you guys.
Sure, no problem. I can go first. Yeah, so at Malvern Prep, of course, I think it's really important to know and learn where we were and where we want to be. And I think it's very unique to have these amazing reports that GiftSmart provides, and very many different styles. But with that, we're able to really take a deeper dive into our lessons learned. Internally, a lot of our teams review this data. It's not something that we necessarily share with too many people externally, but definitely it gives us a good idea of where we were and how to improve or shift, pivot to get to where we want to be.
And to jump off of that, we do something very similar in the reverse respect. We actually use it a lot to talk to our board, tell them why this event is important. These are the reasons we're doing the things we're doing. Not with just the event, but the Google Analytics with our website and marketing, because sometimes it's hard for people to understand why marketing is so important. So we can provide that tangible data to board members and stakeholders so that they can understand that it is working.
In that vein, for each of you, you guys touched on it, in terms of the audiences that you're engaging with, so whether it's the board, donors, volunteers, development staff, things like that, are there, obviously everybody kind of has their own numbers they're accountable to and things of that nature. So, is there kind of standardized metrics that you all have across the board, or is it, based upon what call you're going into or what group, I need to be armed with kind of X, Y, and Z information?
I mean, we have an impact report we use every year, and I think it's a little different for us because it's about animals, but we do have standard ones that we pull, obviously, like how many animals were saved this year, how many were adopted. That's not really anything to do with Google Analytics, but sometimes we can correlate those things. So if more animals are getting adopted and more animals are being seen online, then we can indirectly relate those things, and that's really important.
Yeah, same here. I think that, the reports that we're able to use throughout the campaign also help generate our end of year report, which is something that we share with all of our constituents. We also use the reports and the metrics that we get through GiftSmart really to empower our team. I feel like facts, figures, data speak volumes. And actually, Sam and I were giggling earlier because I think that all institutions kind of have these volunteer committees, right? And many times some of them go rogue, some of them have ideas, and sometimes you need to reel them in. And I think that having these solid facts and figures really gives you something to stand on and very gently push them in the right direction. So very beneficial to have some info and facts.
No, absolutely. And I know one of the resources we just put in the chat for folks is a link to it's a free, they have classes in other places, or you can do remote. And I've taken a bunch of these general assembly classes to learn how to use Excel in a more configured way. So, definitely check that out. But, and Kirsten, yourself included in this, for each of the three of you, people listening who, I need a calculator to tell me 5 + 5, or who look at Excel and it freaks them out, what sort of just kind of recommendations or advice or own experiences would each of you kind of offer as advice, maybe for people who cringe when they hear the term analytics overall?
I can answer that one first. I think having an idea of what you want to answer before you just dive in and start looking at the data, what is going to narrow down that playing field and that scope of what you need to look at. Because if you go in and you're just like, I'm going to see what the data tells me, well, that's a broad brush, stroke of the data, and it's hard to then narrow down your mind, because you're just looking, you're so inundated with information that before you even look at the data, have an idea, form a thought of what it is that you want to achieve when you look at this, and then that's going to be able you to focus in on those areas and actually build your story to and formulate the thoughts and the end product based on the data reports that you then focus in on, and give yourself that laser focus to answer that question that you went in with.
Also say, don't be scared to use different types of reports. I mean, that's one of the benefits of GiftSmart, right? For some people, seeing dirty, reports have multiple lines and all these numbers, sometimes that's more intimidating than a simple pie chart that has colors, right? So it depends who you are and what you want to see. And we're all different, and it's great to be able to pull these reports in many different styles. And it's the same data set, and it's very useful.
The first thing that came to mind, and this is going to be funny to everybody in the nonprofit world, is hire somebody who knows how to do it. I know that's not always possible. And like you were saying, Pamela, GiftSmart makes it super easy to pull those data reports, but for all those other platforms, you may not make it so easy. Get somebody who knows what they're doing.
So I'm curious, actually, in that vein, one thing I did it for an organization based in Chicago is talking about ways to engage your community outside of maybe a traditional gift. Is we're talking about something that's like, hey, I'd be more than happy to take a look at this for you and go. And so I've always been curious, within the nonprofit space, is that something that, either of you have either done or no peers maybe have done of kind of enlisting volunteers who might be, a business analyst or, work in tech and be able to build something to kind of help as, hey, instead of making your contribution this year, could you help us with a project? I don't know if that's a foreign concept or if either of you kind of, kick the tires kind of within your own organizations or something along those lines.
We don't necessarily dive into it that deep. We do try and look at trends and patterns, but it's not something that we've analyzed that deeply. I do know some colleagues that do. They do take a much deeper dive and do a lot of math and manipulation of the data. So it's something to explore for sure.
And I will say we've had, supporters and board members offer their services. And my advice is just be really careful about how far you let them get into it, because sometimes they, like you were talking about earlier, they go a little rogue. But yeah, definitely use their abilities because that's what they're there for.
No, that's great. And I know, kind of, we'll get into it more in depth and talking about some of having a plan. I think, Sam, you made a great comment that I'd love to have you kind of expand upon for everybody is, when to start the planning process. And okay, hey, we have all this information available at our fingertips, which can be overwhelming just as much as it can be exciting. But some of the things that you guys have kind of lessons learned in terms of when to start incorporating some of the analysis maybe into the process.
I would say, honestly, the best time to do it is the excitement after the event has happened for next year, because you're riding that sort of high of you've had this great event, hopefully. And, normally we'll push it off until the committee starts, in 3 months for the next 6 months. I would say do it as early as possible. Have a plan for what you want to look at, what different reports you want to use and what you want to use them for, but just make sure you do it really far in advance, because if you get too close to your event, it becomes too late to make it worth your while.
That is fantastic advice. And similarly, kind of, I know we talked about a little briefly before as well, the, post-event from a communication aspect, especially to some of the large supporters, but, how much weight do each of you place on letting people know, here's how much was raised, or, hey, now that we have the information, kind of sharing some of the results, whether it's monetarily or just overall engagement or some of those things, kind of how important is that to your guys' overall kind of engagement and communication strategies?
Sam, you can go first, because I think we do it more during the event, not so much post.
Yeah, it's really, really like important to us. So we do report to all of our supporters, the ones who came and also people who didn't come, how much money was raised. I'm looking at a letter on my desk that this event itself has raised over $1 million total. And every year we update that, so that going forward, they know every single year this is cumulatively doing this. And then I think you kind of touched on this, Patrick, but we use the reports to see who we need to follow up with afterwards and who's the important people to keep up those relationships with, and maybe who hasn't done anything with us before, but maybe could potentially become a supporter.
Mm-hmm. For us, the reports that we use, we were really happy to be able to get the detailed donation report from last year when we did our campaign with GiftSmart, and that really told us, showed us a little bit of a pattern of when people's tendency were to give and donate, what hours, what days of our campaign. So we were able to use that during the event. Also, in terms of how much we were raising, Patrick, like you said, how much communication do you have with your constituents about hitting your goal? We focused a lot of our communication about how close we are to getting our goal, typically during the campaign. We were really heavy on that. At the end of the campaign, it was one simple thank you email, we hit goal, thank you, it's all to you. But yeah, it was mainly during the campaign that we were really focused on communication.
That was awesome. I think similar to the nice part about how each of you do it, I think is a great thing to remind folks is there is no one strategy that works, because if it did, everybody would be doing that, and the world would be a far different place. So I think there is no one size fits all solution, and different metrics and different things are along those lines going to be important. I know we kind of had our first question come in, and Sam, it's kind of more directed to you, but anybody else, as always, feel free to expand upon. Once you do have kind of that donor list to target post-event, do you guys do anything to segment donors and, hey, people maybe who gave at this level versus this, do you send them all the same messaging, or, kind of how does that process, I guess, overall work for you guys?
Yeah, so we kind of have a stewardship plan that goes all year long. So we use the same one. But yes, we definitely split it off. So people who are giving like $10,000, really it's, if they gave more than $1,000 at the event, they get a call from a board member or a committee member. If it's a little bit less than that, normally 100 to 999, they get a handwritten thank you note. And even like our big spenders, like our presenting sponsor, those people that spent the tens of thousands of dollars, I take them a personal gift to their house, and it's normally like the wine glasses from the event if they didn't get to come, or cookies. And you would not believe, like simple cookies people rave about it, and I just leave it on their doorstep, or if they're home, I knock and talk to them. But yeah, we definitely use different strategies for different levels of people, and it really works because people don't get that nowadays.
That is now hungry, but I think that is an awesome way of doing it. And I know it's kind of wrap up talking a little bit more theoretical and esoterical almost about numbers and stuff like this. I think as we transition, just as a confirmation to make sure we kind of talk about it, it sounds like both Pam and Sam, the role that data plays within the organization, while it might be different in terms of how you're looking at it, is still something that I think Pam, as you had said, it helps sometimes, especially dispel notions of one person hears one thing and all of a sudden, that becomes the world was on fire, and being able to be equipped with some information. So making sure we didn't hear it incorrectly, that for both of you, it is something that, kind of serves as a foundation and a weapon at your disposal in your toolkit, so to say, that makes it a little bit easier to have some conversations. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes we hear, I'll give you a quick example. We were going to try and do this instant buy item, and our committee was pushing to do this one instant buy item. And they said, everybody's going to want it. So we were able to pull some data and say, well, actually, this hasn't worked in the past. Here's our data to prove it. So let's not go down this road and spend all this time and energy. So really, I think that data really backs you up. And as development officers, we have to tread lightly and be very appreciative of our volunteers. And so that kind of helps us out.
I mean, I agree 100%. We always have the one sister of the board member who said they'd sent too many text messages or whatever. And so all of a sudden everybody's so upset about it. And then we really go back and look at it and they're like, no, I loved it. We were informed the whole time. So, yeah.
That is perfect. I think everybody listening, probably the second you said that, has an example of the board members, sister and whatnot that goes. So that is awesome. And kind of, transitioning now from talking about it to, let's look at some information, and especially how can you leverage it. So Kirsten, we'll toss it over to you here to talk through some of this Google Analytics information, which again, we'll keep putting resources in the chat. So if you haven't checked that out in a while. And I know one of the things that, especially for current customers today of GiftSmart, we have the ability to track, put in a tracking code to be able to generate this information that Kirsten is showing kind of right on your own. So with that, Kirsten, we'll kind of toss it over to you.
Awesome. Yes, I will share. Can you give me a little thumbs up if you can see my screen now? All good. All right. Just wanted to make sure that while I'm talking, you can actually see what's going on. So the first report we're going to dive into here is going to be some of our social media reporting. So if we come in here, obviously we're going to go to the acquisition, all traffic and channels report, and we're going to dive a little deeper and go just into the social aspect of things right here. So let me get that pulled up. Of course, since I'm sharing my screen, it's going to go a little slower for me. And because I have some other comparative data to show as well, I'm just going to pull last month's data so we can have a side-by-side comparison, which you will see here in a minute. So like Patrick was saying, the beauty of this data is that it's free, right? It's free to create a Google Analytics account, and it's easy to start tracking your data relative to your organization, because all you got to do is just pop in that tracking code, right? I want to point out quickly that you want to add that tracking code as quickly as possible, because it's going to give you the most amount of data that you can get, since it's not going to start tracking for your campaigns until you enter that code. So when you put that code in, it's not going to backfill or provide any retroactive data. So you want to make sure you put that tracking code in as soon as possible and not wait until post-event. Now, as I've been talking, you've been able to see this report here, and you may have already seen that the most successful social media platform when looking at the traffic coming in across all of our campaigns stems from Facebook. Now, looking at last month's data, Facebook alone drew in over 80% of the social media traffic to our sites, with Instagram stories, of course, a very distant second, bringing in 8.5% of the traffic. Now, does this mean that the data generated from your campaigns are going to follow this pattern exactly? Not quite, but perhaps you're part of that curve that's bringing up the Instagram stories, and 10 of those 23,000 people are yours. But this would obviously change, and that would obviously change the focus of your future marketing events. Now, however, if you don't have a baseline yet for your Google Analytics because you're new to the game, then this is a pretty good starting point to illustrate where the most concentration and effort should be focused. Another interesting thing to point out here is that the numbers at the top don't really change too much regardless of the environment that we find ourselves in. So let me pull over a graph here of 2019. I'll just kind of line that up so it lines up nicely with what we're looking at today. So as we see here in the 2019 data, we were fully in in-person environment, and we still had Facebook in a significant lead, with Instagram, of course, being that distant second and Twitter following right on its heels at third. Now, let's go over 2020. All right, here's our 2020 data. In 2020, we were fully ensconced in that virtual realm, and the data looks the same. With Instagram did take a little leap, about a 10% leap up, but still holding on to that second spot, but still a really distant second when compared to Facebook. So again, when we look at 2021 and we consider the fact that now we are in whatever hybrid world we find ourselves in based on our location, because some of us are more open than others right now, we see that it hasn't changed, right? Those top three are the top three, regardless of what the environment's doing around us. So what this tells us is that even as the environment around us moves drastically from one extreme to the next, the social media platform traffic remains steady. And it's still an excellent report to use to start shaping your targeted marketing efforts for your future campaigns, because no matter what the environment is, this is what it's going to look like.
This is awesome. And we have had a flurry of questions, so keep them coming. Kirsten, actually, if you could maybe bring back up your screen. The first question was in terms of the breakout of, it was with the users and the new users in the sessions. Kind of, could you just explain to folks maybe who haven't seen it of what kind of each of those categories is, for lack of a better phrase?
Of course. So the users, new users, and sessions are relative to this date range that I applied right here. So this is specific to this date range right here. The users is the total number of users that came on to the site during this time, during that 1 month time frame. New users are people who had never been to the platform, to visit a campaign site ever during that time frame. That 256,000 of them were brand new, users. They had never been there before. These sessions, and the nice thing here too, obviously I don't have to, you look at this too. When you just hover over those little question bubbles, it kind of gives you that nice little description. So the sessions also, again, this is only relative to this date range. It's the period of time that they were actively engaged with your website. So this means that they went onto your site and they did something, right? So that logs it as a session. And maybe they came on there multiple times, and that's multiple sessions. Well, I'm not going to go into anything over here because we may dive into some of that stuff later, but to answer that question, Patrick, I think for the users, new users, and sessions, hopefully that answered that question that they had.
No, I think that's great. And especially the fact that the little bubbles have the information, it's even better. And then I think, in terms of kind of paraphrasing this question here, in terms of a real life use case of what can I do with information? Because otherwise it's just a bunch of numbers on a screen. I know, Sam, one of the things you had mentioned, in working with the board, or some of the things is talking about, showing some of the marketing efforts and quantifying the results and things like this. So, in your experiences, as we look at this and kind of seeing the social traffic, if this was, and this is for kind of our entire platform, but if this was you kind of presenting to your team, what would this information tell you, in terms of your social strategy, or kind of how, things went overall?
A lot of it has to do with like what we're spending on these things too, because that's always what boards are wanting to know about. But being able to show them, especially the new users, and the sessions are important too, because if you can say, we had this many, bazillion new users, there's 250,000 is a lot. We can say, the money we spent on this month went up, so you can correlate that, sometimes indirectly, but you can still make that correlation for them so they can maybe understand that it is paying off, and that people are coming to the website. And also something, I don't want to go in front of Kirsten, but something we look at too is what pages they're looking at the most. And so that's why we talk about spending the most money for us, it's adoptions. we spend more money on that area because that's the page that people are going to the most. And it really pays off because a lot of our board members are data focused and want those hard numbers. And sometimes it really helps us improving what we're doing is working.
No, that is awesome. I mean, from an acquisition standpoint, knowing what is working versus isn't, and okay, hey, our constituent base, this is the network where they are, so let's put a little bit more kind of weight behind it, I think is a great thing to be able to go overall to it. And I know, Kirsten, this was just one of a few different things, because I think a question that come in is, what else can analytics show up beyond the social media, which is unintentionally a great transition to the next report that I know you're excited to walk through as well.
Yep, absolutely, Patrick. The next one here, just kind of builds off itself. And what the report we're looking at here is our users by time of day. And this is providing that, of course, that additional layer of building off of that source traffic. Because obviously it's one thing to know where to focus your marketing efforts, but now how about when? Knowing what time of day your users are most likely to engage with your site lets you know when the best time is to be sending out those email blasts or social media posts. And if we look at this graph right here, we're going to see that the most concentrated times when users are engaging with the platform is on Thursdays and Fridays during the lunch hour and from about 3 to 8 p.m. And again, on Saturday, this is pretty similar, with the lunch perusal beginning a little earlier and the evening viewing beginning and end times being extended by about an hour each way. Now, of course, this makes sense because many events are on Friday and Saturday evenings, so we would expect to see those numbers increase during those evening times. However, what we can also tell is that by Thursday, people are ready to be on their devices and they are actively engaging with the sites. So this can tell you is that Thursday is not only a great day to be sending out messaging, but also if you're wondering if you should open up your auction a few days early, well, you may see some of those users are happy to start engaging prior to that event day. We just had this feature come out, it's pretty cool, where you can schedule your text messages to go out automatically through the GiftSmart platform. And by utilizing this feature, you can just set it and forget it, right? Especially in those instances where maybe it's not convenient for you to hop on your computer or your phone and send out those messages during these peak times.
No, that was great. And I know Pam, we're going to talk a little bit more about it kind of with some of the things you guys did in terms of analyzing time when people made donations. But I'm curious, I'll offer to you first, and Sam, if you have anything, is if the call to action for your donor base is revenue generating, then hey, we have some reports and go. But if your call to action is our page is live, or hey, we added a new item, but it's in preview mode and stuff like this, we're looking at this, but whether it's through this or, how would you analyze, did the message work? We sent it at noon. Did anybody actually go there? I'm wondering if information like this would, in combination with some of the revenue things, help you guys kind of analyze whether it's the program or timelines, what's working and potentially what to modify.
Yeah, well, I think that some things are time sensitive, right? Some communications are going to be time sensitive, like these items are now in preview mode, and then that gets turned on at 12 noon. Okay, so that's time sensitive. We're going to make sure our communication goes out at that point in time. But some things are action based, like we want you to vote, we want you to donate, we want you to bid. For those type of communications, we did look at the data sets from last year and see, okay, very much like Kirsten has on her screen right now, right? What were the peak times? What were the times that people were more likely to be around their computer and take action? So I would say that those two are kind of like the types of communication we have, like more action-based versus time-driven. And then in terms of just having people participate and have more engagement, all of that kind of, I think, also ties into the communication that you put out with videos and photos. Anything that comes off of a different platform, we would use those metrics, like Vimeo, right? We would see, okay, how successful was this video? How many views did it have? Anything on YouTube? And those were kind of the metrics we used.
During that, you made me realize that we actually did look at the data for when to open our auction. So we always only do it the Saturday night of the event, but this year, because it was dual, we decided to open it Thursday night, and it was kind of like a surprise. The auction's open now, and it was super successful. Like, people were bidding right away and getting in bidding wars all 3 days, and it opened it up, for more time for people to spend more money in the same respect, you want to make sure you don't open it too early, but so that's why these metrics are super important to start seeing when those people are like ready to come to the event or ready to be bidding on your items.
No, that was awesome. And a question came in that I think is a great one is, this individual works at a small organization that's kind of, and she's relatively newer in her role. So, as we look at some of these data points and talk about it, how much information, when you have to present upwards to whether it's a board or, other leadership individuals, do you come armed usually for each of you with a lot of this stuff overall, or I guess how much, more often than not, data do you come equipped with for kind of conversations like that for people who are maybe newer in the development space?
I kind of want to say less is more, because if you give them too much information, I hate to say them like there's some like, whatever, God or something, but if you give them too much information, sometimes they can take it and run with it more than you want. So you kind of have to guide the conversation to where you want them to be giving their attention to. So we bring them the information that is important to, let's say it's our resource development committee, and we want them to, go greet those top donors at the event. Like that's the information I'm going to give them, not which item had the most bids, because they don't need to know that.
I 100% agree with everything you said. Exactly. I think less is more sometimes.
Yeah, less is more. As a person who struggles with brevity, I can tell you that people do prefer it when you do come equipped with less. That was awesome. And Kirsten, I know on the Google stuff, I know that was awesome information. Was there any other things that you either wanted to point out, whether it's visually or just commentarily for folks who might be looking at something like this for the first time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one fun little aspect of Google Analytics is the real-time data, and especially during your event. It's exciting to see how many people are on there and engaged and knowing what's going on. Especially when you're having a virtual event or a hybrid event, because obviously if you're in person, you can look around the room, get a pretty good idea of how many people are there. But if you have a hybrid component, or if you have a strictly virtual, realm, how many people are on there right now on your site, watching it and seeing what's going on. There's some, depending on what streaming service you're using, you may get some of those analytics that tell you how many views your live stream has through the platform, et cetera. But by adding, obviously when you add that tracking code, you get this real-time data letting you know how many people are on there at that moment. The other fun little piece is down here, the map view, is it's also showing you the geographic locations that are being represented in your pool of supporters in that moment. So you can even decide to throw this out and have your MC do a fun little shout out, and letting everyone know how many listeners are tuned in right now, or telling them we're appreciating all the support we see coming across the whole country, or on the West Coast, East Coast, in the South, whatever. So it just brings that fun little bit of information that really there wasn't any other way for you to find it out besides coming here to the real-time data.
No, that is awesome. And I think in particular with the hybrid settings of people doing it, and having this up in addition to kind of the real-time reporting from a revenue standpoint, and giving it to the MC to call out of, hey, we have 300 people or things, I think is definitely a great thing. And just to kind of summarize 2 points, Kirsten, that you had said to make sure we heard it correctly, is being able to set up a Google account, to take advantage of, is something that people can do entirely for free. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. Well, there obviously is a paid option, but the free one gets you everything that you need to know. So.
No, that is great. And then, for people in terms of adding the tracking codes and stuff like this, your recommendation is the first second you think you might want to do it, go ahead and add it, so that way you can start tracking the data early versus trying to capture things that you would lose from doing it after the fact. Is that right?
Absolutely. Better to have the data and not need it than to need it and not have it. So as soon as you set up that account, get it on your org hub, just let the data start tracking. It's going to do it, and you literally don't have to do anything with it if you don't want to, but at least it's there in case you do. So, because there's nothing worse than post-event going, oh man, I wish I would have set that up so I could have seen it. Because the nice thing is that you set it up at your org hub, and then it's applicable to every campaign that you ever create in your future. So, like I said, set it up. It takes a few seconds. It's very easy, and then you're good to go. You have your data.
Oh, That is awesome and informative too. So with that, kind of as we transition to our kind of final section here, most valuable reporting is we had asked Pam and Sam to send in kind of, okay, what are some reports that each of you guys utilize the most? I know we alluded to it a little bit, Pam, with what you all did with donations in terms of analyzing from 2020, what people are doing. So can you talk us through kind of how you use this and how you used it, as well as what it allowed you guys to kind of do to put yourself in a good position on the second year?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So we basically just exported this report, and then we were able to sort it by timestamp. Then we were able to, number one, do a count of how many donations came in by hour, and number two, do a count of how many donations came in per day. We did a 3-day virtual event. So this year we were able to see, okay, on day 1, we had X number of donations, day 2, this many, day 3, this many. So in taking a look at last year, we were able to say, wow, the importance of day 3 was significant. That's the day that everybody gave. So we really tried to modify our campaign this year using the data that we kind of broke down. But this report was awesome.
No, that was great. And then, with the two, I think you said you guys just click the Excel button, take it in there, which is the greatest tool that exists overall. And then did you, in addition to kind of the timing, I think you'd said this, and if you just mentioned, I apologize, is the, looking at the levels, did that kind of say in terms of, looking, hey, people gave it these various levels, as you guys looked at it, did it come as a surprise in terms of the analysis that you did after the fact? Or when you saw the most common things that people did in 2020, did that set up what you kind of stock asked them to potentially give at in 2021? Is that right?
Right. Yeah. So we were able to look at the data from last year, and we saw the more common donation amounts that were given. So when you go to any GiftSmart homepage, you'll have the online giving form where you have those little buttons that have preset amounts. And that's something that you can customize based on whatever you're doing. So using the data that we had in this report, we were able to change those amounts based on frequency.
That is awesome. And then the kind of next one, I know that between Pam and Sam, each of you kind of talked about it in a bunch of different ways, is, item performance. And so what's cool is each of you kind of took the same data set, but looked at it a few different ways. So really whoever want to go, first, but as we look at items in terms of how many bids it got, how many bidders, the fair market value, to each of you, what is it that you all would do with this information, in terms of both analyzing success as well as, potentially soliciting right type of things for future events?
We mostly look at what items did the best, and ours is an art auction mostly, like 75% of it's art. So a lot of times we look at that really early on, like our event is in March and we're about to start the committee in August. So in August, we'll go back and look and see which artists did the best. And those are the people we go to first to give them the most time to make that donation, that art donation again. And same goes for non-art items. So we do trips and things like that. So we'll go back actually years, because we've used you guys, I think, for four years, and see like what trips did the best. Was it Destin, Florida, or California, or somewhere overseas? And we try and get things like that donated to get obviously the same outcome or a better outcome.
We use the report very similarly, like Sam said, right? Obviously, you want to use the items that are most successful, but to us, our main concern this year was trying to recreate this sense of engagement, this feel of community. So one of the metrics that we focused on this year was the number of bids, because in our eyes, that also replicated or was indicative of engagement. So to us, seeing those items like the Hop on the Whiskey Wagon that you see right here had 55 bids. We were receiving emails and texts of people who wanted to win it. It was the talk of campus, right? Everybody wanted to bid it. So that to us was that type of engagement that we wanted to recreate this year.
No, that is great. And I'm building off that. I'm curious, for each of you, this item, 12 separate people bid a total of 55 times, versus say this item where there was 39 bids, but it was 5 people. Do you, when you're looking at kind of that engagement side of things, if it's two people in a bidding war, that's obviously something very different than if, hey, everybody has an interest. So is it, will you guys kind of look at the two together, or, if something was just two people bid on it, but those two got aggressive with each other and went back and forth, would that be something you would seek out as much as ones that maybe had a higher engagement in terms of the number of unique people who bid, if that makes sense?
I would say both, and in different ways. So we've even gone as far to see like the lower one. So two people who bid 50 times, I will see if those two people are coming back. And if I know they like Alabama, I'm going to get an Alabama piece. And hopefully they're going to go for that again. In the same respect, we would hopefully get items that were bid on by many, many people many times and do the same thing.
No, that's a great point. And Sam, you talk about in terms of soliciting this, is this, hey, for people, let's say Jane or John Doe donated this particular item, do you ever, for people who donated specific things, will you guys follow up with them of, hey, you had in addition to, I'd love to get this again, just from a, an overall partnership standpoint, is that stuff that you guys would kind of disclose of, hey, just so you had the most interesting thing, like, that was awesome, really appreciate it.
Yeah,
overall?
Absolutely. Most of the time for the ones that do really well, if they didn't do as well as they wanted, I only tell them if they asked. But yeah, definitely the people whose items did the best. And before I forget too, a lot of times those, like we're talking about trips, a lot of times we'll go back to those two people. If we have more than one trip in our pocket, we'll sell the second one too. So that's something to consider too. You can look back at that data, and if you have a couple trips and maybe you just only put one in and something similar, you could potentially sell that again to that second bidder or third bidder.
No, that is a great point. And I know the nerd in me always wants to mention, we have a kind of a silent auction study that we'll be releasing where we analyzed like 100,000 lines or something of all the items for 2019, 2020, what performed well. And I think to that point of looking at it, knowing what's working well, and everything like that. And one of my colleagues who actually did the study is letting me know it actually is released, and we're putting it in the chat so that people can see the effort they put into it. But kind of talking about additional reporting streams and things like that. Sam, I know you talked about one of the reports that you'll take some time with is the, as I scroll through here, kind of the top donors by revenue and looking at, okay, hey, here are the people who engaged in different things like that. So you can spend a little bit more about when you look at this report, kind of what it tells you and what you'll do overall with the information of looking at some of these kind of people who contributed most and things like that.
Most of all, it was helpful this year because we did do a dual purpose event, and we gave our sponsors the option of doing a house party or coming to the event, but they got first dibs on the first 100 tickets because whatever, it's too much information. But any of the people who decided they did that they weren't going to sponsor, but they spent a lot of money last year, we invited them for free. So for example, Elizabeth, let's say, I knew she spent a lot of money last year, and so we wanted to make sure she was invited, and it not only gets that person in the room to hopefully spend the money, but it makes them feel good that you gave them that free ticket. So that's something super important that we use before the event. And I will say that you made me think of it in the middle of this report we use a lot after the event, because my biggest advice to anybody is, yes, events are great, but they're a lot of work. It's all about what you do with the data after the event, because these people are probably more valuable in a one-time ask than coming to the event. So the event is about the friend raising and the relationship, not necessarily the money raised that night.
The event about the friend raising could be my new favorite thing. So if anybody takes one thing away from today's call, I very much hope that would be that. And kind of, I know both Kirsten and I, one of the things in that same vein that we've always kind of taken a look at is in addition to the top, people by bids of it was the one we had, is the person who bid a lot. They were actively engaged, but fate wasn't on their side. Somebody, went deeper in their pockets for that particular item. But, when you would look at something like this and seeing, okay, here's this person who maybe from a revenue top line didn't show up. Are these still folks that you would include in kind of those outreach and things and, ask for a gift or something like that to engage overall? Or is it just looking at the one kind of overall, if that makes sense?
I don't know if that was at all of us, but we definitely use that. And mostly just this year, because I was reading about how important it is to engage the people who didn't spend any money at the event, because a lot of people focus on the ones who did spend a lot. But you got them in the room and they're there for a reason, so don't ignore them, especially those ones who did bid. A lot of times they just have a $0 because they didn't win, but they still cared.
No, I think that is a great point, especially tying it back to, as we're looking at that social media kind of acquisition report of getting the eyeballs is X% of the goal. Getting them there for them to do something is the remaining percentage of the goal, and looking at the totality of it and kind of not putting all the eggs in one basket overall. And I know kind of in a tangential sense, kind of talking about reporting, Pam's one things we were looking at is you guys for your bash campaign use the voting feature where people could vote on a particular, actually, you know, what's better than me describing it is if you could kind of describe it, I'll click the buttons here as we go, because I think it's a cool way of showing how, you know, not just from a revenue base, but from a kind of numerical way, some things you can do stuff.
Yeah, sure. So our school held this very simple bartending contest where we had a bartender that represented all different types of programming, and people could pay $5 for a vote. And the event itself was very successful. This mini campaign, we were able to raise about $45,000 just in voting. And yeah, I mean, all throughout the campaign, all the teams, all the individual programs wanted to know, you know, where am I at? How many votes have I gotten? How much money did my program raise? So we were able to use one of the displays that GiftSmart has that we were able to embed right onto the home screen. So everybody was updated. They had the data. They could see exactly where they stood. And with the fundraising, we also were able to share this through social media. But one of the reports that we really used was also the bid, right? So on the main report page, this pie chart was phenomenal. If you take a quick look at the orange slice, that was super easy to see. Okay, our votes are doing fantastic. We're at $46,000. So it was neat seeing that pie chart kind of grow. We were also able to pull the other report, the voting report, and we could see not only how much money was raised, but where people's interest lay. So now we were able to say, oh, okay, this donor is supporting football, they're supporting lacrosse, they're supporting robotics. So now we know what speaks to our donor and how to follow up with them going forward.
That is cool. And I think the nice thing is, my biggest thing, and sometimes it gets me in trouble, but the biggest recommendation I give to anybody in reporting is just click a bunch of buttons. And a lot of times you're going to find some stuff going. And I know even earlier as we were looking this and the ability of like, oh yeah, you can just click in and drill was something that there we go. So I think as we talk about all of this stuff, don't hesitate just to try. A lot of times, especially if you're a good system, you can't break it. So I think being able to kind of, you know, go through it and stuff like that. And you know, it's kind of, we get near the end of the call here. You know, Kirsten, Pam, Sam, if there was one piece of advice or recommendations or tips or things like that each of you learned in your careers and roles in terms of data and how to use it, maybe when to use it, when not, is there one kind of main parting word of wisdom that each of you would have for folks listening with us today?
It's a loaded question.
Yeah.
Honestly, this is only our second year using GiftSmart, and I will tell you that my biggest lesson learned from last year with the reports was almost what you said, Patrick. Don't be scared. I clicked on every single report that GiftSmart had available just to see what it did, what the difference was. I know for me, everybody learns differently. And so the fact that they have these reports in so many different styles, some reports click and spoke more to me than others. So don't be afraid. You don't have to use all of it, but definitely explore and see what works for you in your institution.
I would say ours, like we have a really big focus on major donors. And like I said earlier, like utilizing the data you get from an event for other things. So, I mean, even Pamela, you just made me think of something I'm going to do after this, but like looking at what they spent money on, what different part of the appeal they gave to. So did they give to the clinic? Did they give to adoptions? Did they give to rescuing animals? And I use that later in conversations with those singular donors and hoping that I can get them to give more later on. So my biggest thing is the thing about fundraising is yes, the event is hard and you spend a lot of time on it, and it's sometimes you want to just like give up, but it's so worth it because if you use it in a way that it pays off in the end. So don't just do the event and spend a million hours on that one night and then forget about it. You've got to use everything that you learned from it later.
Yep, absolutely. I agree with 100% what both Pam and Sam have said here. And, you know, like we said before, like Pat said, don't be afraid. I mean, get in there, just look at it. If it's not speaking to you, move on to the next one until you find one that does. Eventually, there's going to be that little nugget of information that you find, and you're like, that's it. That's what I was looking for, right? Like that's the breakthrough. That's the how I'm going to get the board on board. That's how I'm going to show my supporters how amazing they were and how they helped us and you know what that money did and for the program that they all care about so much. So you know, don't be afraid. It may seem intimidating at first. Take it in bite-sized pieces. Don't try to look at everything all at once. Go in with that formulated idea of what you want to find that, and then move on to the next thing as opposed to looking at it holistically.
That is, I think, perfectly said in 3 for 3 across the board. So with that, you know, thanks Pam, Sam, Kirsten, to three of you for joining us here today, as well as all you folks listening. At the end of the call, all of you listening will get a survey so that we can get some data on hand to analyze and make sure that for the rest of these episodes, as well as just other content and information, we can continue to bring things that are relevant to all of you and make sure to help in whatever ways we can. So thanks for joining. Thanks for the three of you. Similar to what Sam had said, we'll try and get some cookies and wine out to each of you for giving up your time and expertise. But with that, we appreciate it and hope everybody has a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.